from time to time I'll notice people will say something along the lines of they never want to be the sort of person who has a routine, who's stuck in a routine, and they're the sort of people who I guess sort of look down on that, sort of view it as a bad thing, as a sort of situation where you're stuck and you're no longer growing. But the interesting thing about a routine, especially by the time you hit your 30s, a routine involves something, involves things that we like doing or need to do. It involves a very, very long process of filtering, of living, of finding these things that we either like so much or we need so much that we're willing to do it over and over and over again. And the routine that we find ourselves in is exactly the combined sum of all of our efforts. The whole point of finding things that you love is so that you love them so much that you're willing to do them over and over and over again. You want to do them over and over again, and it feels like the first time every time, even though there's a compounding effect. But I get the sentiment. It goes with the opposites, where if you happen to be a person who has made your routine instead of being somebody who's sort of fallen into a routine, then you're fortunate because you did that on purpose. And within that, there's room for spontaneity. That's always what it is. It will always go back to that. It will always go back to stability mixed with spontaneity is ideal. All spontaneity is not ideal, and all routine is not ideal. It really is the totality of what we've been doing here all along. And if you're somebody who doesn't like your routine, there's a very, very good chance that maybe you didn't make it, maybe you fell into it over time. There needs to be this sort of duality of opposites that makes one seamless flow. Stability is a unbelievably rare thing, but we have it. Earth is such a stable environment. It's such a stable and beautiful system of balances. It's absolutely astonishing how every single day with our relationship with the sun, it's up, down, sleep, wake, every day over and over and over again with remarkable stability. And the United States is a very, very good example of the just insane value of stability. The United States is very, very stable, and romantic relationships are best when they are stable, but with, of course, passion and spontaneity in there as well. It's very hard to be somebody who is committed to one half of a whole in most things. After seeing the way things are, it's very difficult to be somebody who could ever say something like, I want to be a spontaneous person, or I want to be a stable person. That doesn't compute, because it's always both. And it's interesting how our thoughts activate our body. Our thoughts, the things that we think about, draw a real physical response, which is completely wild. Like if you think about, you know, the fight that you got in with somebody, it will raise your blood pressure. If you think about somebody you're attracted to, your body will respond. It's crazy how we have this almost movie player in our mind, that this thing that we can either control or it sort of happens to us. But there is this very, very potent landscape of imagery, of motion in our minds, and we watch it. We witness the activity of our minds, sometimes as true spectators, like in a dream. Most dreams, you're a spectator. You're not in control, because it's very similar to watching the activity of the mind. It's similar to like a TV flipping through channels. If you were to stop on a single channel, you would learn a lot about that one thing. But a TV flipping through channels is the natural state of the mind. The natural state of the mind is to constantly be flipping from thought to thought to thought, especially thoughts that are not tidy and organized, with a plan and with everything nipped in the bud. Those thoughts will keep coming no matter what. They will always keep coming, because the human being is a remarkable troubleshoot. We live to solve. We live to fix, to troubleshoot, to organize. We really do. And if there is anything around us that is left unorganized, it will truly bother us. Some people more than others, but all of us, to some degree, really can't rest with things undone. We really can't rest if we don't feel as if we've cleaned the place up a bit, so to speak. And in this universe, any place can be thought of as the center. Any place, any time is the center. Reality rests on you. As far as you're concerned, you're the center. And the other end of that is knowing that as far as everybody else is concerned, they're the center. It's this give and take. And it's at its root symmetrical. It makes sense, you know. And when I say relationships are shapes, I mean, if you have somebody in your life who is always taking and taking and taking, and you're always giving and giving and giving, you can draw that. You can fix that on paper, and it'll make sense. Because it's almost like translating audio onto a visual. It's almost like translating a wave onto a visual. Only we are just remarkably complex. It's like that situation where when you think of anybody in your life, when you think of your mother, your father, your husband, your wife, as soon as you think of that person, how they exist to you becomes known in this feeling that you get when you think of them. And that feeling that you get is a shape. It is motion. It is the product of motion, and it is continuation of motion. It is a image. It's a feeling that can be made into an image and understood in an image. And it's interesting with people. I've known people my entire life, obviously, and it's like sometimes in life, sometimes with people, you have to go away for a while. You know, even with the best of friends, even with people you've known your entire life, even family, even everybody, there always needs to be some time away. Because when you're together, you have this chemistry, you build this relationship, and everything is fantastic. But when you're away, that's when all that stuff really starts to play out in the world. The ramifications and the benefits, the pluses and minuses of that relationship are shown in other relationships, just by contrast, automatically. And when you're away for a while and you come back to a person, well, you reintroduce yourself. There's been people that I've met that I've known for years, and I don't see them for a year. And when I do see them, there's this whole reintroduction process, and sometimes they're completely different people. But nobody becomes a completely different person when they're always in your presence. People who are always around seem to really never progress or change or grow. Because people who are always around are people who you're always bonding with. And the nature of that bond is known to you intimately. But when people are away, that bond, it changes. The world changes it, and it brings what the world has done to that person back to you. And when they reintroduce themselves and you reintroduce yourself, you're sort of going over your previous relationship. You're sort of reconnecting, but at the same time, there's this new part. I'm sure you've noticed this. There's this whole new thing. There's this half of you that has this very deep understanding of each other, and you can always go back to that, and you can always have your memories and reminisce. But there's this other part now, this new element. And I've seen people go from people who were basically disrespected by everybody, and were very forgettable people who go away for a while and return completely different human beings. And that would never happen if they stayed around, because that lack of respect, that chemistry, would continue to grow down that path. So, even with healthy relationships, I mean, all relationships must have some short or long period of time where you're taking yourself and isolating yourself. And I don't mean anything extreme. Even if you're married, you have 8 hours a day where you're away from your spouse, you take time to do things with your friends, do things alone, do things where you're not together, so you can bring the world back. You always carry them with you, you always have that relationship with you, but you let the effects of that relationship bleed into the world, and you bring the world back to that person, and it's a way of always having life in your relationships. That's not to say that being together all the time is akin to death, but it is not going to be as interesting. There's something about us that bonds, pair bonds, and can pair bond in such a deep way, a truly deep way. And that bond can sometimes be made even better when you're out in the world and you're, without even realizing it, contrasting the world to that relationship. And that's what it feels like to miss somebody. That's what it feels like when you long for somebody that you care about. And if you don't miss somebody, well, then you'll be glad to change and come back different if you do come back. But once you see things in this way, once you fully grasp that anything that can happen and anything that will happen involves the friction and synergy of two opposing forces who are one process, then everything becomes perfectly clear. Not black and white, not low resolution and simplified, but within that is contained the infinite multiplicity of life. And and the United States in particular, our political situation. We have our two-party system, but within those two parties, the right is effectively stuck with the far right, and the left is effectively stuck with the far left, because each side encapsulates the full spectrum of political thought, for better or worse. But the thing that keeps it stable is those people more near the center who have more in common with each other, who are the great majority, are the ones who are able to almost ignore their extremes. Extremes can be good, but only for short periods of time for a very specific purpose. You don't hang out on the extremes because you just don't. That's like sprinting all day. You just don't sprint all day. You also don't lie down all day and do nothing. It's some combination of everything meeting in the middle. That's why I never worry about the United States in terms of its politics. The United States adapts, changes, and learns extremely quickly, remarkably quickly, especially compared to almost every historical example. We truly are the center of history now, this place. This is where the world's people have come together to try this out, to try this thing we're doing over here. And it's interesting with the way information is shared, because this what I'm doing and what many other people are doing, it's seeming more and more appealing, because there's a lot more people now who are a lot, I guess you could say, not necessarily smarter, but who have interesting things to say. There's a lot to know, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to talk about. And the Constitution here is a strange thing. It's a large fluke to have a document that restrains the power of the government and makes the citizens sovereign. That arrangement is very, very peculiar. The Constitution exists to keep the civilians, keep the population, keep the public sovereign. Everything within that document, especially the original document, is designed to restrain the power of government. And government's always going to have its uses, and I remember when I learned about systems that involve merging the government and private enterprise into one behemoth. That's such a massive mistake, because you need the private sector to bail out the public sector, and you need the public sector to bail out the private sector when in need. If you merge the public and the private together, they will fall together, and they will require external help when the time comes. You have to have two opposing forces that work together in a synergetic way. You can't just clump them all together, because if you do, that clump is going to need to find another opposite, something else to be in opposition of. And that's when things are at their maximum health. When there's this line right in the middle where there's exchange, just like the brain. The hemispheres are allegedly two, I guess, opposite. They have basically opposite functions. There's the abstract and the objective, the abstract and the form, the form of things. And you just can't do it with the right hand, with just the right side or just the left side. You can't take away the split in the middle. They have to be opposites. They have to truly be opposites, like male and female. And it's interesting, when I was a kid, this is something I'll never forget. Like, when I was a kid, I was laying in bed and I was super sick. And I must have been like 8 or 10. And this is before I knew anything about God, anything about religion, anything like that at all. I found myself bargaining with something. I somehow understood that I could bargain with something. And I didn't know what it was. I remember I said, if you get me through this, if I don't die, if you make me better, then I promise I'll be good. That was the basic premise. And I had no idea who I was talking to. I just somehow innately knew that what I was saying has a good chance of not going unheard and just disappearing into the ether. And then I did get better, and then a year later I got sick again. And I remember I was like, alright, if you make me better this time, I promise I'll be good. I know I wasn't good for this year, but this time I'll be good. And I learned at a really young age how difficult it is to know what the ideal is and how to healthfully exist with it. I mean, I don't think anybody really has this image in their mind of the ideal of perfection and really, literally tries to be that. I don't think people really do that. If anything, I think people see other people who are closer to that and think to themselves, well, I can at least get closer. Because we all know, I mean, we all know good and well that we have this part of us that is, I guess you could call it divine, and we also have this other part that is completely animal, completely entropic. It's messy, and sometimes it's easy to start to want to just not have the messy part. But imagine if you did. Imagine how boring that would get. I mean, it sounds nice, but it would be truly boring. And I know that it's been tried. I know it's been thought of. And it can't go on forever. It just can't. It's like living in a perfectly and completely sterile environment where there's no bacteria, no plant life, and everything is just crisp and clean and perfect. Now what? That would get so boring, so fast. There has to be a little bit of the other too. But on the other end, you don't want to live in a complete pigsty. You don't want to be living in filth. So you never want to chill on the extremes, I'm telling you. If you're going to go to the extremes, and this is advice to even those of you who are, if you happen to hear this, high up in the political realm, do not hang out at the extremes. It's not something that you can engineer in the public. You'll never, ever, 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 ever be able to sell human beings to live in an extreme forever. If you do manage to sell them on it for a period of time, it will end. But if you completely sell them, then the end probably won't be good, because that fast, something that moves that fast with so many people, usually comes with tragedy. If you're going to get extreme, it has to be temporary, like war. You don't want to always be in war, but war is necessary sometimes. You don't want to always be fighting, but sometimes you have to fight. You don't want to always be on offense. You don't want to always be on defense. You don't want to watch a football game that's only offense or only defense. That would get boring very, very quick. I mean, imagine a game where one team was on offense the entire game and one team was on defense the entire game. It doesn't make sense. That's not how things go. And I really do hope, way deep down in my soul, that people somehow hear this and understand this. You will never be able to sell human beings on extremes for extended periods of time. So anybody who has a vested interest in anything like that, you may as well just not even do it. You may as well not even waste your time, because people may be interested in extremes temporarily. If you can persuade them that they're in an extremely bad situation, they may need something extreme to pull them out of it. Maybe. But you need to go back to center, man. You know? I say that's my advice to anybody. You always have to go back to center in everything that you do. You cannot redline all the time. You cannot do it. And if you do, I have to ask, like, what's your intention? I mean, I really do question sometimes, like, there are people who have actual fucking malice, like, who aren't just stupid, but actual malice. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference, because, you know, if you're playing baseball and you know, you're the catcher and there's somebody up to bat and he's right there swinging at the baseball and he hits you in the knee with the bat. If he does it one time, okay, it's a mistake. If he does it twice in a row, okay, might still be a mistake. But by the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, by the seventh time, this dude's beating you with a bat. You know, sometimes stupidity and clumsiness can look like malice and vice versa. So I really do wonder sometimes with some of these things that some of these people do. I have to wonder about their motives, because the answers are sometimes so clear. And honestly, for a lot of the things that we are going through now, we've already solved, and we're regressing in some areas. And you know, I suppose there's the shock of the internet, and that sort of flipped everything on its head. You know, it's almost like we have to start over with some things, because there's so much information available, so many different things that people just didn't know before. So people have to, like, learn things for the first time in a weird way. Things that we thought were settled, you know. But yeah, it's it truly is an interesting time to be alive. It's probably one of the most interesting years since years. And I'm fascinated by the way you can have one event happen, and you can have two opposite interpretations of what happened. Two completely opposite interpretations. Now, if you get into a situation where you're around somebody or an entity or a thing or a political party where the relationship becomes adversarial, when you're saying and doing things as the opposite of that other side, just to be the opposite of that other side, because you think to yourself, if I just do the opposite, then I have to be right. If you find yourself there, then you're lost. If you're looking at that thing that opposes you, that other half that you require to exist, that will never go away, that will always be there, this thing that you depend on, that is on the other side, the opposite. If you look at that thing and think to yourself, if I just do the exact opposite of what that does, and I know that I'm right, you are lost. You are no longer interacting in a healthy way. You are no longer firing your synapses anywhere near properly. You've broken a highly, highly complex relationship down into these very, very few straight lines where you comprehend it in such a simple way that makes it incorrect. It's too complex to be that simple. So, let's say the Republican-Democrat situation. When I hear many, many Democrats talk, I agree with 90% of what they say. And same with Republicans. I see that these two parties rely on each other to exist. They do. You will never, if you had a one-party state, say like in California where it's mostly Democratic, it will eventually become oppressive and you will create a hero. That's how you make heroes. You rule everything, slowly start to oppress, and a hero is born. And then you start to get rolled back. That's the story. That's how it goes. And we do really like to think that we can gobble up the other half. Like men like to think that they can truly understand women, and women like to think they can truly understand men, and we rely on each other, to exist at all. And you'll never have just women, you'll never have just men. And if you do, then you don't have anything. And a one-party state like China, like the Soviet Union, like North Korea, Iran, they are slowly making somebody at some point into a hero. They are slowly building this opposing force that has to exist. I mean, in places like that, it does exist, but it's very, very small and very, very weak because it can't not exist. You can't just have one party or one way of thinking or one gender or one eye or one hand through and through. There's always going to be some amount of its opposite somewhere. The question is how much of it. And that really is the problem. It's a trick of the mind. We really do like to think that one half can gobble the other up and be its master, And when people talk politics, they talk very, very seriously, as if that's possible, as if there can be a permanent team that is forever in a state of victory. And I know not everybody thinks that way, but people talk that way. I mean, there's some things being bantered about that sound pretty absolute. I mean, it sounds pretty all or nothing. And that's how you know you're lost. You've lost the plot. You're gone. You're no longer playing the same game everybody else is. You're now doing your own thing. It doesn't gel or participate within the game you think you're playing anymore like it used to. And this is just happening on a much larger scale with a whole lot of people who are very serious. Very serious. Because we've gotten to this point now where some of the things being said, if true, would be very serious. Of course, but it's an example of a situation where there's a group of people trying to paint an extreme situation that would require extreme action, although this extreme situation does not exist. So all the extreme action and extreme rhetoric and extreme words feel out of place. And when you say them, people look at you like you're crazy. Democracy was not on the ballot. Democracy is not in jeopardy. There cannot be a dictator in the United States, even if somebody had dictatorial aspirations, even if they had a supermajority. The Constitution restrains the power of the government and very clearly defines the roles of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It's pure fiction that anything but what we have and what we will have could come about. This thing picked up its momentum now, and it grew and grew and grew, and people liked the idea of selling political ideas under this extreme cloak. We're in this extreme plight, so we require these extreme words, these serious words, and these serious actions. But it's not true. None of it is. It is absolutely not the case. And it's been absolutely fascinating to watch how how persuasive people, creative people, can come up with these words and say them, and then get other people to say them too. All the while, they're completely wrong. Absolutely fascinating. Anybody who is psychologically minded or philosophically minded has watched over the last 10 years a glut of material, of subject matter. Very interesting. So, if you find yourself having very, very deep, and serious emotional reactions and feelings in a place like the United States, you've lost the plot. I mean, there are very important elections with very important consequences. But in the Roman Empire did go from a republic to an emperor, but the Roman Empire did not have a constitution. It was a very different place. Very, 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 very different place. Different time, different people, different everything. And me personally, even if I voted for somebody, I wouldn't want them to change anything about our government. Change things about the country, change policy, change this, change that, but don't change the way the thing actually functions itself. Because this stability that we have now, this stability that we're riding on, and we will continue to ride on, is because of that. It's because of the way this thing is set up. The only complication comes when you add people, because people tend to kind of blur things a little bit. Now, the letter of the law says one thing, but a person will come up and interpret the law to mean something that fits what they want. So, there needs to be, in my opinion, and there will be. That's what's happening. This is what it looks like when change is happening. This is what it looks like when old forms of media die and new forms take over. This is what it looks like when you push the pedal and try to cultivate this extreme circumstance for you to bring your extreme remedy. And people not only don't buy it, it's not that they don't buy it, it's that they know it's not true. And once this is the thing about manipulation. If somebody's manipulating you, once they tell you that, you cannot be manipulated any further. Once you know you're being manipulated, once you know the game rules, once you understand what's happening, you're immune to it. You don't even, you view it totally differently from then on out. Once you become aware that somebody is doing something to you for a particular reason, and the things they're saying are being said for a particular reason, then it changes the way you hear all of it. It changes the way you hear all that information until trust is rebuilt. And honestly, to anybody who hears this and feels uneasy, everything will truly be fine. It truly will. So, and this isn't, and sometimes this day and age too, it's easy to hear somebody say stuff like this and think that they have some sort of alternative motive. Like, that's how deep we're in it now. When somebody says something that is just raw and pure and just, it's true, and it's interpreted as though it must have some angle somewhere, And sometimes you have to preface things. You have to do that. But yeah. And not only that, the United States is going to be actually the opposite. It's, no matter who ended up president, they were going to preside over a huge economic boom in the U.S. And whoever ended up in office was either going to help it or hurt it. So, the next 10 years or so for the U.S. is actually going to be really good. And that's just the way it is. It has nothing to do with politics necessarily. It's the entire direction of the country, of the people as a whole, and the world too. Like, there's a lot going on out there, and the United States is just in a fortunate position. And yeah. Anyway, cheers.